I'd like to introduce my good friend Sri. Sri is a technology leader with over 25 years of experience, spanning artificial intelligence, machine learning, software engineering. He is the director of AWS's Generative AI Innovation Center. He leads a global team of ML scientists and engineers, applying the latest advances in generative AI to solving complex challenges for commercial enterprises and our public sector. Prior to AWS, previously at AWS, Sri led our ML science team, who partnered with organizations like the NFL, which you've maybe seen our next gen stats and some of the things we've done with them in player safety. Cerner, a small company called NASA, he was involved with in his teams, leveraging AI ML to transform their organizations and the products and services they deliver. So without further ado, please let me give a warm welcome to my good friend Sri. He is an inspirational speaker, and I think you're really going to enjoy what he has to say.
Awesome. Thank you, and welcome again. Good afternoon. I'm Sri Elaprolu. I've been with AWS for a little over 12 years, 4.5 years to be precise, and I head up our Generative AI Innovation Center. So what is the Innovation Center? It's a program that AWS has launched about 2 years ago to try and help our customers think about this fast emerging technology called generative AI, where and how this technology could be applied in order to transform your businesses and bring value to your activities. And then not just help in the transformation side, but actually scaling and sustaining that innovation so that you're able to gain advantage and start leveraging this technology in a quick and fast turn way. So as a course of doing that, as a global operation, we've had the privilege of working with customers across every industry, every geography that you can imagine, and customers ranging from some of the fastest emerging startups all the way to global multinational enterprises and everyone in between. So over the next 40 minutes, what I'm trying to do is to walk you through that journey as to what have we learned, what are we seeing in the world of generative AI, and hopefully that'll inspire, it'll give you some ideas to go back and look at. And again, after you get inspired, if you have thoughts, ideas that you want to bounce with us, feel free to do that. So let's jump right in. Again, you may have seen a variation of this, or you probably are fully aware of this, right? So this is a journey that is moving at lightning speed, the generative AI journey. So back in 2023, when late part of 2022, when ChatGPT showed up, everyone across the industry, no matter which industry you were in, were caught a little bit surprised off guard at the power of what LLMs, large language models and foundation models, can bring to the table. So there is a ton of experimentation, proof of concepts, figuring out where and how to apply this technology in their specific industry has been going on in 2023. There's a lot of experimentation that happened. What we've also seen is in 2024, that conversion started happening, which is experiments enough, let's go into production, let's see the value. In 25 this year, we're seeing a massive scale up in terms of not just deploy into production, start scaling up globally if that applies to your business, and then also start implementing more and more use cases because the value has been realized on the ones that have gone into production. There are some catches here, right? So there are some best practices that we can walk you through, which is to look at the right use cases at the right time, applying optimization techniques in order to get the true value out of it. Now, broadly speaking, there are 3 categories of use cases across the globe, all industries. Again, this is generalizing it, right? There are internal efficiency use cases. So these could be enabling your employees, your teams to get more productive, enabling them to do things much faster, better, more effectively. If you look at, for example, software development practices, they're being transformed entirely from what has happened yesterday to what is going to happen tomorrow. So that's one example of where we're seeing internal productivity enhancements being brought about by the use of generative AI. The second area is efficiency, right? This is where you take a process, let's say you do financial reporting or you do employee onboarding, you may be doing other sorts of things that are more or less internal, and in some cases, even external business processes. And you're able to optimize those, innovate on top of those to speed up, to be more effective, to be less costly. And there's a ton of activity going on in that productivity improvement. The third, which is actually the more exciting part, is innovation, right? Which is where we are seeing new products emerge in the market at a clip that we have never seen before. And these products and capabilities are not practically possible without generative AI. So there is a lot of innovation that's going on in the net new category of bringing new products, new features, new capabilities to market. That's all well and good. And we think that that's busy enough. We're actually starting to see this next wave come at us, which is, you probably have heard of the words agentic AI, which is truly transformative. This is a capability that has such immense potential when applied appropriately, that every business, any and all activities that you're doing are going to get disrupted. And so it's better to get on board right now and start experimenting versus waiting for a time where the disruption is starting to happen. So let's look at what agentic AI is all about, right? So the whole idea with large language models or generative AI is you have a big model. That's why they're called large language models. And if you generalize them, foundation models, they've been trained with immense volumes of data. And therefore, these models have memory, they have knowledge. So in 2023, the applications were you ask a question, you get a response. Maybe you ask a follow-up question, you get a response, right? So it's more question and answer style activities. And along the way, there were techniques like retrieval augmented generation, where you can fuse your enterprise data, you can fine tune, you can do all kinds of interesting things. But at the core of it was always a ask, get back, right? What agentic AI does is it just exposes it in a completely different way. So rather than you having to program a piece of logic, you ask a prompt to an agent, which is then using the model's reasoning capabilities to figure out, what does that mean? What does it need to do in order to meet that question or the outcome that you're expecting? It then comes up with an execution plan. The model is telling it to figure out what that execution plan is. And then it starts executing on it. So I'll give you a really simple example here, which is if I want to go to, let's say, London next week for 3 days for a business trip. I want to leave on Monday. I'm based in DC. So I want to go to London. So most likely there's airline reservation needed. I'm going to stay for 3 days. So most likely I need a hotel reservation. And I have customer appointments. I have other appointments that I need to take care of. So there's calendaring and scheduling that's needed, right? That activity required a ton of individual transactions that you're having to do currently. In an agentic world, one command going into the model saying, I want to travel to London for 3 days next week, starting or leaving on Monday, can then get sub-parsed out by the model using reasoning to figure out that there is a hotel reservation needed, there's an airline reservation needed, and scheduling, and then call sub-agents for each of those activities to go figure out airline schedules and availability, hotel reservations. Not just figure out and come back, but if I'm okay with it, it actually goes ahead and executes and completes the entire travel itinerary, comes back with the final confirmation. So that's really the power of where you're not having to code and tell the model or the software what to do, but rather you're expecting an outcome. And let the models indicate and figure out and tell the agents what to do. The agents are then able to call external tools, use the data. In this case, for example, my preferences that I like to travel on a particular airline and so on. It's using all of that to execute on your behalf. Now imagine applying that simple example to a true business problem. That is where you're going to see the disruption happening. Again, if we step back a little bit, the whole world of agentic AI is not new. We've always seen general productivity assistance along the way. Many of us use some sort of chatbot, some sort of messaging apps, etc. Right? These have been around. What we're seeing is as the evolution and the technology gets more and more complex, you're able to go from a more human-directed capability, which is more assistance, to a fully agentic system where you're expecting an outcome or you're indicating what you want happen, and let the agents and the master agent figure out and then execute on your behalf. So this is the transformation that we're in. And to be fair, from going from left to right on this slide has been less than 2 years. And the pace at which things are happening on the far right is super exciting and a bit concerning at the same time, in the sense that it's moving so fast that if we don't pay attention, if we don't jump on this right now, we're going to be quite left behind. So let's look at a couple of examples of where productivity, right? These are things that we've used, personal assistants, whether it's chatbots, whether it's shopping assistants, you name the flavor, right? You've been using these. It's that infusion that we're starting to see in these same capabilities with agentic agents or agentic AI. One example of our own is Alexa Plus. Many of you probably are users of Alexa. You've used Alexa in some form or fashion. With Alexa Plus, which is a new capability that came out, it's truly agentic AI enabled, meaning, again, not just question and answers and activity and actions on your behalf for in a limited scale, but rather full, complete operations that you can execute through voice commands in this case. My colleague Emerson is actually going to go in much deeper into this. It's his area of specialization, so I'm going to leave it to him. Now, it's not just calling data sources or APIs and executing on your behalf. Agents are also starting to do a lot more activities like a human would do. You may have heard of things like web interface activities, right, where an agent calling an LLM, figuring out what to do, coming back out and starting to click web interfaces on your behalf so that it's actually simulating what a user would do. And this to me is just the beginning, right? You can imagine full-scale automation that's coming quickly. And what's causing all of this to happen is a convergence of facts. The models, which are at the core of all of agentic AI, are starting to get a lot more capable, right? The reasoning capability in these models are so good that you're probably going to get better and consistent response from these models on the execution plan than if you were to go and ask 10 humans in your company to ask them to do the same thing, right? These models are getting so complex because of the processing capability, but also the fact that they have been trained on such massive amounts of data. Models are also getting cheaper and more effective. And so this is, again, powering more agents to come online at a faster clip and a much cost-effective manner, and therefore that's spurring more innovation to happen in this space. Many of the companies that are starting to lean into agentic AI over the last few years have invested heavily into data platforms, right? Getting the right data foundations in place. So when you have the right data foundations in place, it's much easier to plug agentic AI in because you know what data sources you have the authorization and access controls in place. It's a lot easier to get moving in this space. And then the last thing is the development tools. Agents are not going to happen magically, right? You still have your dev teams to go in, configure them, define what you want happening at an enterprise level. And the tools to do that are starting to come in very aggressively. Now, one of the predictions that Gartner has is that by 2028, more than 30% of the applications will be leveraging agentic AI. I think it's actually going to happen sooner if I were to predict. And it's probably not 30%, it's going to be faster. And this is my own prediction based on the rate at which we are working with customers and seeing this acceleration. This is not waiting till 2028. Okay, so how are enterprises looking at agentic AI? There are two broad categories. The first is within the enterprise use and maybe even some external uses where if you want to automate a piece of function or a workflow that you're doing, you could perhaps pick up off-the-shelf capability that's agentic AI based, or you build something in with limited customization and therefore able to get going faster. So that's one way enterprises are deploying agentic AI. The second one is building it, right? So building it within your own teams, primarily because you may have requirements that are very bespoke, that there's no off-the-shelf tool, or perhaps your requirements require you to customize it heavily, which means it may be better off to build it natively. And where and how are value being derived? How is value being derived with agentic AI? There are, again, three broad categories. The first one is workplace productivity. So think of any and all processes that we have in place right now, whether it's your development teams, your HR systems, your people management systems, you name it, all of that process could be automated and accelerated. So internal productivity or workplace productivity is one way. Business workflows, this is where the way you operate the business, not just systems, but the way you operate, your process itself could be reimagined in a significant way. And the last one is innovation and research, and we'll dive into that a little bit as well. So let's look at workplace productivity, right? This is where I said you're reimagining some of the tooling that you have in place so that you can bring in agents to automate a lot of that. So I'll give you, for example, if you are doing software development, this is an area where we see a lot of innovation happening, where not only is software being written faster, but maintenance is a lot easier using agentic workflows. So this is a great area to start, and it's a low risk one because it's internal facing to start with. One example of this is what NFL has done, which is, in their case, their media and engagement department, right, on the media side. NFL runs a huge operation for media, because you can imagine on any given Sunday, there's a ton of video assets that get captured. And those assets need to be processed. There's all kinds of use of that video asset down the line, right? Whether it's teams diving into specific plays, understanding what happened or what could have happened, or it's the broadcasting teams using it. And to make value from all of that, NFL had to build a number of systems. And so one of those areas is, how do you allow agents to help optimize the flow of retrieval of those assets and make that process so simple that when you onboard new employees into the team, you want to speed up their onboarding process and get them productive. So in that case, by applying that agentic flow, they've been able to speed up the onboarding and enablement process by about 60%. So instead of what it used to take, which is days to weeks to retrieve valid information, we're talking about minutes now. The other area I mentioned, this is software development processes, right? So again, generative AI has been around for a while, for a few years now, where code generation has been happening. Your teams probably use some of this as well. What we are seeing with agentic AI is reimagining the entire software development lifecycle, not just coding. You can go from a version of software to a different version. You can upgrade between the same versions, right? Same language, different versions. You can transform from on-prem to cloud. There's all kinds of innovation that's going on in the software space. One example here is our own, right? As you can imagine, Amazon has a fairly large software development team globally. We do a ton of code. So in this example, over 10,000 applications have been migrated using generative AI and agentic AI in particular. Going from one version of Java to a next version of Java used to be days, weeks at a minimum for any given application. We're now talking about, in any given day, being able to migrate 1,000 applications in a matter of minutes and get to the end state so that you can actually get productive. You get your developers to do coding, not going through upgrades and documentation, etc. And this is resulting in, as you can see on the screen, more than $200 million in annual savings for Amazon alone. And we have many more customers that are actually using this approach to transform how their internal software practices are being reimagined. Let's look at the second area, which is optimizing your business workflows and reinventing that. So when you think about bringing agentic flows, right? If you want to automate a process, like let's say in this case, a loan processing or a financial processing capability, it's not easy, right? You have to think about all the steps. You have to think about how to code all of that. So one example here is that using our Q business, you can literally type in what you want. This is where the emergence of agents, but also generative AI core competencies come in, where you type in a natural language and let the prompt actually decide what is the workflow that needs to get built. And then you can interact with that system to refine and continually refine until you get the entire workflow built out and you start pumping data through it. So this is where you're merging agentic AI as well as the natural language processing capabilities as large language models and building a tool that's actually executing and building workflows, agentic workflows on your behalf. Okay, so an example of this is what Cognizant is doing in their data processing capabilities, where they've achieved, applying this logic, they've achieved more than 50% savings in productivity. So just one example of where we're seeing significant improvements. Multi-agents, I mentioned earlier, agentic AI is not one agent. One agent is probably where you're starting with, experimenting and piloting and playing around. But the true value is when you break it apart into multi-agent systems. Now, if I go back, early days of software development, right? We used to write monolithic large code. And then we figured out that that's not easy to maintain. It's painful. It's very brittle. It breaks easy because any change anywhere could break the whole thing. So we started decomposing. We started creating modules or components or functions, right? Same logic is applying here. Instead of taking an entire workflow, creating one mega agent, you break it apart logically into sub-agents. So reusability kicks in. So create a number of agents, sub-agents, and you can go as many layers as you want, by the way. Although I wouldn't advise going too deep at this point, maybe 2 to 3 layers down. But the whole idea is decompose your workflows so you can build a multi-layer system and have the master agent be truly the orchestrator and have these sub-agents be domain specialists or task specialists. So that way you optimize for cost and performance and reuse. And so we're seeing this evolve rapidly. An example of this is what Moody's has done with their financial reporting systems, where they have to generate financial reports for their customers, which is taking weeks. So using this multi-agent orchestration layer that we've helped them with, they've gone from weeks per report generation and evaluation to hours. And so you can imagine, the cost savings and the productivity improvements that they're able to get with just one of these deployments. Last one is innovation and research. And like I said earlier, this is the true exciting part because you are now opening up all sorts of possibilities. This is where enterprises, up until now, right? So if you look at productivity improvement, you look at experiences, etc., they're good, they get you in, but the true new product life cycle or new service or new capability comes through this innovation cycle. And so an example of this is what Genentech is doing. They're part of the Roche company in the pharmaceutical space. They're in the space of doing drug research, providing and identifying the right compounds that are appropriate to further in the drug research space. In their case, they have to, as you can imagine, their scientists have to do a lot of research to understand the proper compounds, the combinations, the side effects, the positive outcomes that you're trying to drive. It's an intensive effort. And if you want to further multiple compounds, it just multiplies quickly. And so by using agents, by using that agentic AI workflow model that I mentioned, you're able to delegate a lot of that work, a lot of that research work, and aggregate all the summarized versions of the data that you're looking for and let it happen. So that led to, in their case, roughly 5 years of manual effort offloaded by letting agents do all of that autonomously. And then come back with the right outcomes or right summarization so that I can then decide quickly which compound am I going to further on the research track versus where I don't think it's worthwhile, so I'm going to stop. So again, imagine the productivity gains that they're getting. And it's actually not just productivity gains, they're actually able to bring new compounds to the market much faster than previously possible. Now, this all sounds exciting, but it is also a little bit chaos, right? So how do you think about what should be the right framework? And this is an area where we've spent quite a bit of time working with customers to understand how should we guide and how should they guide their teams in applying some framework that'll provide them some guardrails, some channels to work through. So I'll go through this a little bit. The first one is working backwards. Again, anyone who has worked with Amazon teams anywhere, right? AWS for sure, you hear this concept over and over, which is work backwards. Always start from the end goal in mind work backwards to figuring out what it is that you want to do, not the other way around, right? Don't lead with technology. Technology should be considered as an enabler, not the means or not the reason why you do stuff. So guidance, and it applies here to agentic AI as well, is start with the end goal in mind. If you have a business process that you're trying to automate, let's figure out which business process do you want to automate, and more importantly, why. Are you trying to gain speed? Are you trying to cut costs? Are you trying to scale better, right? So having those outcomes in mind, then working backwards to defining what is the right approach. Is it agents? Is it Gen AI? Is it traditional AI, right? It's always going to be a bit of combinations of these things. So start with the outcomes in mind and work backwards. And when you look at so let's say you've figured out which business process or which solution you want to pursue, there's not one size fits all. And it depends on your enterprise, your readiness, and your willingness to lean into this, right? So there are some areas where you could start with what's available off the shelf, with maybe off the shelf as is, or minimal customization, including agents that are now available in the marketplace. And that's good enough. And that may be okay for what you're trying to do. For things that may require a little bit more, in this case, let's say your dev teams or your app dev teams want to build something that's a little bit more custom for your specific needs because you have unique challenges or you're trying to optimize a process that's unique to your business. This may be an area where they're going to leverage capabilities like, in our case, Bedrock agents, right? Using a Bedrock service, which is a foundational service for Gen AI on top of AWS, allows you to access many models and allows you to choose best of breed for your specific needs. And I'll get to why that actually matters quite a bit when I get to more of that optimization space. And so this is another area, technique that customers use or teams use if they want to build something that's a little bit more bespoke. And the last one is complete DIY. If you have deep AI expertise and you're trying to solve a problem that is so unique that there's nothing off the shelf and you're going to have to do it yourself, again, you can do this by looking at some open source frameworks that are available, as well as tooling that's available, and stitch it all yourself. And so this is good if you are trying to address a problem that's really unique, but it also comes with a little bit of burden that you have to now manage it and maintain it yourself. Again, there's no wrong answer, right? It depends on what type of a problem you're trying to solve and your organizational readiness and depth and skills that are appropriate for that problem. The second one is, this is true for lots and lots of things, for sure for generative AI, but even more so for agentic AI, which is your data is your differentiator. Every company, I mean, in the fullness of time, every company, every application is going to be agentic based, for sure. The question then is, how do two companies differentiate themselves? That is where your data, your knowledge, your processes are truly your business differentiator. Because the technology, everyone has access to the same tech. The models, pretty much all of us have access to similar models, right? It's truly how do you differentiate your solution versus mine. That's the data. That's your knowledge, your process. So making sure that you are establishing that strong data foundation if you have any weakness, because what agentic AI is going to force is not just structured data. You're going to have to deal with unstructured data. So think of documents, PDFs, as well as multimodal. Think of images, videos, because in any given enterprise, structured data versus unstructured is actually higher percentage. We always tend to look at the structured data as our source of truth, but there is so much unstructured data that we have been unable to tap into that becomes a lot more attractive now and part of the solution. So, and it's true for agentic as well. Once you get that data foundation in place, now you infuse that with models which then drive agentic behaviors, right? So there you probably are familiar with retrieval augmented generation, which is take your data, index it, put it next to the model, let the model use that data to set the proper context so that any responses, any behavior from the model is governed by your policies, your data, so that it's not generic responses, but rather influenced by your practices. And so that's an area where agent acting on your behalf is going to have to be bound by that same guidelines. Trust drives adoption. One of the questions that we normally get when talking to organizations is that agentic AI seems like this black box magic. How do I make sure that, how do I trust it, right? Because without that, your business applications are not going to adopt this. The adoption rates are going to be quite limited. I actually think it's the reverse, which is generative AI and more broadly AI, and certainly agentic AI. You should be building with responsible AI and security best practices from the ground up. If you do it that way, when your applications are going out, whether it's a POC or a critical system that you operate on or your business relies on, everything that you're layering on top becomes a lot easier to sustain and scale. And so reverse is what we are recommending and actually seeing take off quite rapidly, which is if you build the right responsible AI security fundamentals, we see the adoption rates go much faster. I'll give you a concrete data point in this. If you look at generative AI adoption cycles, right, rates globally, who do you think is the industry? Which industry do you think has the highest adoption rates? Any guesses? Financial services, which is one of the highly regulated industries. The reason for that is simple. Those institutions have been always forced to look at responsible AI, trust, verification, compliance, and that has been baked into their practices. So for them to apply a model or a agentic AI behavior is fairly not natural, normal, right? So that's the reason why we're seeing significant scale up in financial services from GenAI perspective. And right behind that is healthcare. Again, you're seeing regulated industries move much faster because they have those practices built in. And that is going to be a necessary step for all organizations. Maybe not at the same intensity as an FSI, but all organizations are going to have to start thinking about responsible AI security best practices. And here's an example where you want to enforce your organizational policies through systems like guardrails, which is allowing model to behave and respond in a manner that's appropriate in compliance with your corporate policies, whether your branding guidelines, your security policies, etc. So that's another way that you can contain and constrain how the agents behave, because ultimately the model response could be constrained. Next thing is, how do you trust what's coming out of the model is valid and that is based in reality? So this is an area where AWS has been innovating quite a bit, even before the cycle of GenAI, with a concept called automated reasoning. Simply put, automated reasoning is a mathematical verification system, right? What it does is it looks at all of the permutations and combinations of the response that's coming out. It then compares it with the mathematical equivalent of your data source to see if the confirmation is valid enough. And you have access to all of that data, right? You'll actually automated reasoning in Bedrock will spit out all of that data so you can see that. So this is a way where you can not only constrain the data that's coming out by guardrailing, by ragging, but also have validation or proof that is necessary ultimately, in some cases, by the auditors that are reviewing to make sure that the responses are grounded. And so automated reasoning is a good way to constrain what and how agents behave. One example of this is what PwC has done in their Maestro solution. This is an area where Maestro is a system where they're looking at generating and ensuring compliance of pharmaceutical and more generally healthcare marketing material generation. So that's a solution that PwC has. But as you would imagine, in a highly regulated industry like pharma or health, even the marketing material that gets generated has to be validated and ensure that it's compliant with the industry regulations. And so that's the area where automated reasoning helps PwC speed up by generating mathematical proof that is indisputable by the auditor. So that's where you're able to speed up. Another area that you want to keep an eye on is industry standards. These are fast evolving. The one that's probably closest that has come out with that is relevant for responsible AI or security in general for AI is ISO 42001. And AWS happens to be the first cloud provider that is compliant with our services for ISO 20001 or 42001. And we're continuing this with any and all compliance regimes that are applicable and appropriate for AI and generative AI. Okay, so the last one is you got the compliance figured out, you got the right guardrailing and trust aspects figured out, and you figured out the use cases that you want to go with. How do you then optimize? This is the area where GenAI, for all the outcomes, if you don't do it right, it can run up your bills quite high. And that's because you're leveraging large models, and these models are not easy and inexpensive to operate. So there's quite a bit of churn that could happen, right? Optimization is critical. You may start a POC with whichever model, however, whatever architecture you want to start with. But as you get closer to going into production and even beyond, you want to continually optimize. So this is the area where optimization matters, and going forward with that trajectory that agents are going to be running your systems for the most part going forward in a large scale, not one agent or one solution, optimizing at the hardware layer becomes super critical. And so this is an area, again, looking at how we are thinking about, right? So you are familiar with GPUs, that's great. But how do we bring innovation even at the hardware layer so that you're taking advantage of the hardware innovations for generative AI and bringing that optimization into your agentic outflows? And so in this case, Ninja Tech has leveraged AWS's Trainium and Inferentia chips. These are custom-built or purpose-built chips designed and built by AWS for ML and generative AI. And these chips on average give you about 40 to 50% price performance benefits over the traditional GPU systems. And so this is another area where you want to think about when you're designing a solution that's going to be across your enterprise, whatever that solution is. Cost optimization is going to be critical because you may start small, but at some point it's going to scale. And how do you optimize cost? So hardware is one. The second area is choice, right? Models, I mentioned there are many models available, and these models are getting better and faster as we go along. And as you're building a large agentic system, one model is not going to be the answer for everything that you need. In fact, you're probably going to be ending up spinning up multiple models in any given workflow. We're already seeing that with most engagements with our customers. In a given solution, even traditional GenAI solution, there are 2 or more models involved. Because when you're calling for, let's say, a document summarization, maybe one particular model and the size is the most optimal. And then you're generating some content, a different model is optimal. So you want to keep that model choice in mind. And this applies equally, if not more, to agentic AI. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is balance between the amount of cost you're incurring to the latency and the real time versus batch mode that you're operating in. So cost versus latency is an ultimate balance, assuming that accuracy has to be high no matter which way you go. And so this is the trade-off that you're going to do between cost and latency, and you'll have to pick and choose models based on that. We are really, I would say, probably at the first innings of a long game with agentic AI, but the pace at which we are moving, this is the most exciting thing that has happened in the last 6 months to 12 months. Models are also getting better. I mentioned, for example, recently Anthropic as well as Meta released their updated versions of the models that are tuned specifically for agents or agentic behaviors. And the same is happening on the Amazon Nova side. We have multiple flavors of models allowing you to optimize based on what your specific needs are, whether you want to go from text processing that's super fast using Nova Lite to micro, to pro, to premier, which is much more larger model that gives you a lot more context. Again, we are just at the basics, right? The primitives and the components that you're building upon, the first use cases, the first examples that you're going to be working on are just the stepping stones. There's a lot to come as we move forward. And we will continue to be the best place for providing you that choice, whether it's the models, whether it's the architectural patterns, whether it's security, responsible AI, guardrailing, automated reasoning like capabilities that allow you to build your systems and solutions in a trusted manner, as well as optimizing at the hardware layer. Right? So look at AWS to continue to invest in these spaces, and it is a very active investment across the board. And choice, how you go about building, right? This is another critical factor for us at AWS, which is we don't believe in only one specific way of doing anything, right? In fact, we break our own model. Every time we think there's a good model, we break it, we come with a second model. That's the nature of continuous innovation that cycles we're on, and we expect the same to happen with agents. So there is a specialized tools or agents that you can pick up and start using. There's that semi-built or fully managed agentic systems that you're going to be leveraging. And then there will be some over a course of time that your teams are going to build completely from the ground up. So be ready that it is going to be a mix and match sort of type of a system versus one monolithic approach or architecture for all of your agents. With that, I will thank you, and hopefully this was a little bit helpful, and hopefully you learned a little bit. Thank you.
All right. Great job. That was more than a little bit helpful. Come on. Don't sell yourself short. That was incredibly inspiring, but I think the audience can appreciate too the level of complexity. I think we all, maybe right out of the gates, got a false sense of security that this was going to be easy. You just download an app and then magic happens. So for the audience who might be struggling with balancing short-term gains versus true AI transformation for their businesses, Sri, what kind of guidance would you provide our leadership teams out here?
I mentioned, so that's a good one. That's actually a question that comes up quite often.
Sure.
And our team is involved with, in many cases, boards of the company trying to figure out where to invest and how much to invest and how aggressively to move. I would say there are a few tenets that we apply, which is, I mentioned one earlier, work backwards, right? So don't go chase technology because you're going to take a tool and try to figure out where the nail is. Don't do that. Figure out where the nails are and then go find the right hammer to hit. So start with working backwards. The second is start small but think big, right? Eventually, GenAI is going to happen. Agentic AI is going to happen, whether you want it or not. So the sooner you understand and accept that it is going to happen, so get on board. Let's plan, learn, plan. Start small. Start with one use case that you think is the most appropriate, but then plan for that scaling. Plan for that next use case to come in. So that start small, think big is critical. Cost optimization is another one, right? Look for the right indicators. When you look at the working backwards, look for ROI, because you don't want to be chasing use cases that don't have clear response or clear return, because you could be spending cycles that don't necessarily yield results. So early on, you want to build that momentum, the positive momentum of do something, get the results, get folks on board, start doing bigger things.
Excellent. Sri, I'd say I'd double down and say I don't think folks are thinking big enough. And so not just think big, but I think folks need to think bigger about how transformational this is going to be and how best to apply it. I encourage folks to choose partners wisely, those who have done it. We've been leveraging and transforming Amazon's retail business as well as many of our other businesses for the last several decades, leveraging data and intelligence to make all of us better at what we do. And so, again, thank you again for all of your insight today. We appreciate you, sir.